Hey guys, so this will be the last video before my live today. Again, I am Donna with Sparrowstudios7, bringing to you I read and I learn commentary on Genesis 12. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about covenants and Abraham. So, here in my Bible, I have a list of God's covenants brought down through the centuries, and I'm going to read them off, and then I'm going to read 2 pages about Abraham. That'll be the end of commentary for today, but we'll talk more, of course, tomorrow about chapter 13, and I'll be able to tie in some other things as well. So, God's covenants. A covenant is a binding commitment and relationship between 2 parties that includes obligations and promises. God initiates and sets very favorable terms for all of his covenants. We see the covenant in creation in Genesis 9, 1 through 17. After the flood, God promised to never judge the earth with a flood again, but to maintain the created order. With Abraham, we see references to covenants in Genesis 12, 1, 9, which we talked about today. We'll talk about Genesis 15, 1, 21, and chapter 17, 1 through 14 later on. And God will promise Abraham a great nation and abundant blessings, descendants, and land, and to bless all the nations through him. The covenant required Abraham and his descendants to be circumcised and to live a life of integrity. Then I'll breeze through these. He also does one with covenant with Isaac, with Jacob, the nation of Israel, David, and Israel, and the nations of the world. And the last covenant with the nations of the world and Israel. God made a new covenant with Israel, which he fulfilled through Jesus Christ, enabling all people to come to him and be his people by faith in Jesus. I also want to talk a little bit about Abraham and read you some of what they have here about Abraham being a friend of God. Because as you see, we have an entire 2 pages of it. I'm not going to read all of it, but I did want to have you listen to some of it. So this is what they say about Abraham. By faith, Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land. He went without knowing where he was going. By faith, Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. That's part of Hebrews 11, verse 8 and 17. It's called, I believe, the Hall of Faith, the Hall of Fame, Hall of Faith. Abraham's life illustrates the faithful obedience for which he is best known. God called Abram from the city of Ur to become the patriarch of God's people. Abram's family relationships are recorded in Genesis 11, 26 through 32. Terah had 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Terah left Ur with Abram's wife Sarai, and Lot, whose father Haran had died. On his way to Canaan, Terah settled in the city of Haran. God had called Abram to a new land while he was still in Ur. You see this noted in Acts 7, 2-4 in the New Testament. God told Abram, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you." God blessed Abram by making a covenant with him that included promises of great blessing, numerous descendants, and a new land. These promises later saved Israel from destruction when they repeatedly failed to keep their covenant with God. We see this in Leviticus 26, verses 40 through 45. Abram left Haran at age 75 Entering Canaan, he went first to Shechem, a Canaanite city between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. God appeared to Abram near the Oak of Moreh, a Canaanite shrine. Abram built altars there and near Bethel, proclaiming the one true God at these places of centers of false worship. Abram later moved to Hebron by the oaks of Mamre, again building an altar to worship God. We'll see that tomorrow in chapter 13-18. When God again promised blessings to Abram in a vision, we'll see that in chapter 15:1. Abram exclaimed that he was still childless because Sarai was barren. We saw that noted in chapter 11:30. And that Eliezer of Damascus was his heir. He noted this in chapter 15, verse 2. This obscure statement is clarified by the Newsy documents. According to Hurrian custom, a childless couple of means could adopt an heir, often a slave, who would be responsible for their burial and mourning. However, a natural son, born after the slave heir's adoption, would supplant him. Apparently, Abram had adopted Eliezer in this manner, but God promised that Abram's old son would be his heir. This will happen in Genesis 15, verse 4. The hallmark of Abram's life was that he believed the Lord, and the Lord considered him righteous because of his faith. We see this in chapter 15, verse 6 in Genesis. We see it also noted in Romans 4:3, Galatians 3:6, and another is, I'll have to look up the just give me one moment. There's one. They use the books of the Bible in abbreviations for them, and I'm not sure which one JAS is. Let me see. Well, let me see. That may be something that I'll have to get back to you guys on, because I'm not entirely sure. It could be Jeremiah. It could be a couple of different books. But yes, I will look it up and get back to you. But it's that book in could also be Judges 2:23. Abram was declared righteous, not because he was sinless. On several occasions he failed to do what was right. Twice he lied about Sarai out of fear, and he took the provision of a son into his own hands with Hagar rather than continue to wait for God to act. We'll see this in Genesis 16:1-5. But he consistently returned to the faith as a fundamental principle of his life before God. So essentially, yeah, he messed up, but he also trusted God. Thank you for listening.